Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new members of our Patreon family, Kate and John. Thank you both so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us cover the costs of recording, production, and distribution while keeping us relaxed and ad-free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. If you are interested in supporting Boring Books for Bedtime and finding out more about the perks available to subscribers, including exclusive episodes heard nowhere else, you'll find a link to Patreon in the show description. You'll also find a link to buymeacoffee.com, where you can support us with a one-time tip, no subscription required. I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight, we're relaxing with more from a charming work about nature, Wildflowers Worth Knowing, adapted by Asa Dawn Dickinson, from Nature's Garden by Neltje Blanchan, first published in 1917. Let's pick up right where we left off with the flowers of the lily family. Let's begin. Wild spikenard, false Solomon's seal, or Solomon's zigzag, Smellacina racemosa. Flowers, white or greenish, small, slightly fragrant, in a densely flowered terminal raceme. Perianth of 6 separate spreading segments, 6 stamens, 1 pistil. Stem, simple, somewhat angled, 1 to 3 feet high, scaly below, leafy, and sometimes finely hairy above. Leaves, alternate and seated along stem, oblong, lance-shaped, 3 to 6 inches long, finely hairy beneath. Rootstock, thick and fleshy. Fruit, a cluster of aromatic, round, pale red speckled berries. Preferred habitat, moist woods, thickets, and hillsides. Flowering season, May to July. Distribution, Nova Scotia to Georgia, westward to Arizona and British Columbia. As if to offer opportunities for comparison to the confused novice, the true Solomon seal and the so-called false species, quite as honest a plant, usually grow near each other. Grace of line, rather than beauty of blossom, gives them both their chief charm. But the feathery plume of greenish-white blossoms that crowns the false Solomon seal's somewhat zigzagged stem is very different from the small, greenish, bell-shaped flowers, usually nodding in pairs along the stem under the leaves from the axils of the true Solomon seal. Later in summer, when hungry birds wander through the woods with increased families, the wild spikenard offers them branching clusters of pale red speckled berries, whereas the former plant feasts them with blue-black fruit. hairy or true or twin-flowered Solomon seal, Polygonatum biflorum. Flowers, whitish or yellowish green, tubular, bell-shaped, 1 to 4 but usually 2, drooping on slender peduncles from leaf axils. Perianth 6-lobed at entrance but not spreading. 6 stamens, the filaments roughened. 1 pistil. Stem, simple, slender, arching, leafy, 8 inches to 3 feet long. Leaves, oval, pointed or lance-shaped, alternate, 2 to 4 inches long, seated on stem, pale beneath and softly hairy along veins. Rootstock, thick, horizontal, jointed, scarred. Fruit, a blue-black berry. Preferred habitat, woods, thickets, shady banks. Flowering season, April to June. Distribution, New Brunswick to Florida, westward to Michigan. From a many-jointed thick rootstock, a single graceful curved stem arises each spring, withers after fruiting, and leaves a round scar, whose outlines suggested to the fanciful man who named the genus the seal of Israel's wise king. Thus one may know the age of a root by its seals, as one tells that of a tree by the rings in its trunk. Early or dwarf wake robin, Trillium nivale. Flowers, solitary, pure white, about 1 inch long, on an erect or curved peduncle, from a whorl of 3 leaves at the summit of the stem. 3 spreading, green, narrowly oblong sepals, 3 oval or oblong petals, 6 stamens, the anthers about as long as filaments, 3 slender styles stigmatic along inner side. Stem, 2 to 6 inches high from a short tuber-like rootstock. Leaves, 3 in a whorl below the flower, 1 to 2 inches long, broadly oval, rounded at end on short petioles. Fruit, a 3-lobed reddish berry, about 1/2 inch in diameter, the sepals adhering. Preferred habitat, rich moist woods and thickets. Flowering season, March to May. Distribution, Pennsylvania, westward to Minnesota and Iowa, south to Kentucky. Only this delicate little flower, as white as the snow it sometimes must push through to reach the sunshine melting the last drifts in the leafless woods, can be said to wake the robins into song. A full chorus of feathered love-makers greets the appearance of the more widely distributed and therefore better known species. By the rule of 3, all the trilliums, as their name implies, regulate their affairs. 3 sepals, 3 petals, twice 3 stamens, 3 styles, a 3-celled ovary, the flower growing out from a whorl of 3 leaves, make the naming of wake robins a simple matter to the novice. One of the most chastely beautiful of our native wildflowers, so lovely that many shady nooks in English rock gardens and ferneries contain imported clumps of the vigorous plant is the large-flowered wake robin or white wood lily, Trillium grandiflorum. Under favorable conditions, the waxy, thin, white or occasionally pink, strongly veined petals may exceed 2 inches, and in Michigan a monstrous form has been found. The broadly rhombic leaves, tapering to a point and lacking petioles, are seated in the usual whorl of 3 at the summit of the stem, which may attain 1.5 feet in height. From the center, the decorative flower arises on a long pedicle. Certainly the commonest trillium in the East, although it thrives as far westward as Ontario and Missouri and south to Georgia, is the nodding wake robin, Trillium cernuum, whose white or pinkish flower droops from its peduncle until it is all but hidden under the whorl of broadly rhombic tapering leaves. The wavy margined petals, about as long as the sepals, that is to say, 1/2 inch long or over, curve backward at maturity. One finds the plant in bloom from April to June, according to the climate of its long range. Perhaps the most strikingly beautiful member of the tribe is the painted trillium, Trillium undulatum, or Trillium erythrocarpum. At the summit of the slender stem, rising perhaps only 8 inches or maybe twice as high, this charming flower spreads its long, wavy-edged, waxy white petals, veined and striped with deep pink or wine color. The large ovate leaves, long tapering to a point, are rounded at the base into short petioles. The rounded, 3-angled, bright red shining berry is seated in the persistent calyx. With the same range as the nodding trilliums, the painted wake robin comes into bloom nearly a month later in May and June, when all the birds are not only wide awake, but have finished courting and are busily engaged in the most serious business of life. Purple trillium, ill-scented wake robin or birth root, Trillium erectum. Flowers: solitary, dark, dull purple or purplish red, rarely greenish, white or pinkish, on erect or slightly inclined footstalk, calyx of 3 spreading sepals, 1 to 1.5 inch long, or about length of 3 pointed oval petals. Stamens 6, anthers longer than filaments, pistil spreading into 3 short recurved stigmas. Stem stout, 8 to 16 inches high, from tuber-like rootstock. Leaves in a whorl of 3, broadly ovate, abruptly pointed, netted veined. Fruit: a 6-angled ovate reddish berry. Preferred habitat: rich moist woods. Flowering season: April to June. Distribution: Nova Scotia westward to Manitoba, southward to North Carolina and Missouri. Some weeks after the jubilant alert robins have returned from the south, the purple trillium unfurls its unattractive, carrion-scented flower. In the variable colors found in different regions, one can almost trace its evolution from green, white, and red to purple, which we are told is the course all flowers must follow to attain to blue. The white and pink forms, however attractive to the eye, are never more agreeable to the nose than the reddish-purple ones. Bees and butterflies, with delicate appreciation of color and fragrance, let the blossom alone, since it secretes no nectar, and one would naturally infer either that it can fertilize itself without insect aid, a theory which closer study of its organs goes far to disprove, or that the carrion scent, so repellent to us, is in itself an attraction to certain insects needful for cross-pollination. Which are they? Beetles have been observed crawling over the flower, but without effecting any methodical result. One inclines to accept Mr. Clarence M. Weed's theory of special adaptation to the common green flesh flies, Lucilia carnicina, which would naturally be attracted to a flower resembling in color and odor a raw beefsteak of uncertain age. These little creatures, seen in every butcher shop throughout the summer, the flower furnishes with a free lunch of pollen in consideration of the transportation of a few grains to another blossom. Absence of the usual floral attractions gives the carrion flies a practical monopoly of the pollen food, which no doubt tastes as it smells. The sessile flowered wake robin, Trillium sessile, whose dark purple, purplish red, or greenish blossom, narrower of sepal and petals than the preceding, is seated in a whorl of 3 egg-shaped, sometimes blotched leaves, possesses a rather pleasant odor. Nevertheless, it seems to have no great attraction for insects. The stigmas, which are very large, almost touch the anthers surrounding them. Therefore, the beetles which one frequently sees crawling over them to feed on the pollen so jar them, no doubt, as to self-fertilize the flower. But it is scarcely probable these slow crawlers often transfer the grains from one blossom to another. A degraded flower like this has little need of color and perfume, one would suppose, yet it may be even now slowly perfecting its way toward an ideal of which we see a part only complete. In deep, rich, moist woods and thickets, the sessile trillium blooms in April or May, from Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Minnesota, southward nearly to the Gulf. Carrion flower, Smilax herbacea. Flowers, carrion scented, yellowish green, 15 to 80 small 6-parted ones, clustered in an umbel on a long pedicle. Stem, smooth, unarmed, climbing with the help of tendril-like appendages from the base of leaf stalks. Leaves, egg-shaped, heart-shaped, or rounded, pointed-tipped, parallel-nerved, petioled. Fruit, bluish-black berries. Preferred habitat, moist soil, thickets, woods, roadside fences. Flowering season, April to June. Distribution, northern Canada to the Gulf states, westward to Nebraska. It would be safe to say, says John Burroughs, that there is a species of smilax with an unsavory name that the bee does not visit, herbacea. The production of this plant is a curious freak of nature. It would be a cruel joke to offer it to any person not acquainted with it to smell. It is like the vent of a charnel house. Thoreau compared its odor to that of a dead rat in a wall. It is first cousin to the trilliums, among the prettiest of our native wildflowers, continues Burroughs, and the same bad blood crops out in the purple trillium or birth root. Strange that so close an observer as Burroughs or Thoreau should not have credited the carrion flower with being something more intelligent than a mere repellent freak. Like the purple trillium, it has deliberately adapted itself to please its benefactors, the little green flesh flies so commonly seen about untidy butcher shops in summer. Amaryllis family, Amaryllidaceae. Yellow star grass, Hypoxis hirsuta or Hypoxis erecta. Flowers, bright yellow within, greenish and hairy outside, about 1/2 inch across, 6-parted, the perianth division spreading, narrowly oblong, a few flowers at the summit of a rough hairy scape, 2 to 6 inches high. Leaves, all from an egg-shaped corm, mostly longer than scapes, slender, grass-like, more or less hairy. Preferred habitat, dry open woods, prairies, grassy waste places, and fields. Flowering season, May to October. Distribution, from Maine far westward and south to the Gulf of Mexico. Usually, only one of these little blossoms in a cluster on each plant opens at a time, but that one peers upward so brightly from among the grass it cannot well be overlooked. Sitting in a meadow sprinkled over with these yellow stars, we see coming to them many small bees, chiefly halictus, to gather pollen for their unhatched babies' bread. Of course, they do not carry all the pollen to their tunneled nurseries. Some must often be rubbed off on the sticky pistil tip in the center of other stars. The stamens radiate, that self-fertilization need not take place except as a last extremity. Visitors failing, the little flower closes, bringing its pollen-laden anthers in contact with its own stigma. The iris family, Iridaceae. Larger blue flag, blue iris, fleur-de-lis, flower-de-luce. Iris versicolor. Flowers, several 2 to 3 inches long, violet blue variegated with yellow, green, or white, and purple veined. 6 divisions of the perianth, 3 outer ones spreading recurved, one of them bearded, much longer and wider than the 3 erect inner divisions, all united into a short tube. 3 stamens under 3 overhanging petal-like divisions of the style, notched at end. Under each notch is a thin plate, smooth on one side. Rough and moist stigma on side turned away from anther. Stem 2 to 3 feet high, stout, straight, almost circular, sometimes branching above. Leaves, erect, sword-shaped, shorter than stem, somewhat hoary, from 1/2 to 1 inch wide, folded, and in a compact, flat cluster at base. bracts usually longer than stem of flower. Fruit, oblong capsule, not prominently three-lobed, and with 2 rows of round flat seeds closely packed in each cell. Rootstock, creeping, horizontal, fleshy. Preferred habitat, marshes, wet meadows. Flowering season, May to July. Distribution, Newfoundland and Manitoba to Arkansas and Florida. This gorgeous flower is thought by scientists to be all that it is for the bee's benefit, which of course is its own also. Abundant moisture from which to manufacture nectar, a prime necessity with most irises, certainly is for our blue flag. The large showy blossom cannot but attract the passing bee, whose favorite color, according to Sir John Lubbock, it waves. The bee alights on the convenient spreading platform, and guided by the dark veining and golden lines leading to the nectar, sips the delectable fluid shortly to be changed to honey. Now, as he raises his head and withdraws it from the nectary, he must rub it against the pollen-laden anther above, and some of the pollen necessarily falls on the visitor. As the sticky side of the plate or stigma, just under the petal-like division of the style, faces away from the anther, which is below it in any case, the flower is marvelously guarded against fertilization from its own pollen. The bee, flying off to another iris, must first brush past the projecting lip of the overarching style, and leave on the stigmatic outer surface of the plate some of the pollen brought from the first flower before reaching the nectary. Thus cross-fertilization is effected, and Darwin has shown how necessary this is to ensure the most vigorous and beautiful offspring. Without this wonderful adaptation of the flower to the requirements of its insect friends, and of the insect to the needs of the flower, both must perish, the former from hunger, the latter because unable to perpetuate its race. And yet man has greedily appropriated all the beauties of the floral kingdom as designed for his sole delight. The fleur-de-lis, which is the flower of chivalry, says Ruskin, has a sword for its leaf and a lily for its heart. When that young and pious crusader Louis VII adopted it for the emblem of his house, spelling was scarcely an exact science, and the fleur de lis soon became corrupted into its present form. Doubtless the royal flower was the white iris, and as Lee is the Celtic for white, there is room for another theory as to the origin of the name. It is our far more regal-looking but truly democratic blossom, jostling its fellows in the marshes, that is indeed born in the purple. The name iris, meaning a deified rainbow, which was given this group of plants by the ancients, shows a fine appreciation of their superb coloring, their ethereal texture, and the evanescent beauty of the blossom. Blackberry lily, Bellamconda chinensis, or Pardanthus chinensis. Flowers, deep orange color, speckled irregularly with crimson and purple within, borne in terminal forked clusters. Perianth of 6 oblong, petal-like spreading divisions, 6 stamens with linear anthers, style thickest above with 3 branches. Stem 1½ to 4 feet tall, leafy. Leaves, like the iris, erect foldable blades 8 to 10 inches long. Fruit, resembling a blackberry, an erect mass of round, black, fleshy seeds, at first concealed in a fig-shaped capsule whose 3 valves curve backward and finally drop off. Preferred habitat: roadsides and hills. Flowering season: June to July. Distribution: Connecticut to Georgia, westward to Indiana and Missouri. How many beautiful foreign flowers, commonly grown in our gardens here, might soon become naturalized Americans were we only generous enough to lift a few plants, scatter a few seeds over our fences into the fields and roadsides, to raise the bars of their prison, as it were, and let them free. Many have run away, to be sure. Once across the wide Atlantic or wider Pacific, their passage paid, not sneaking in among the ballast like the more fortunate weeds, some are doomed to stay in prim, rigidly cultivated flower beds forever. Others only until a chance to bolt for freedom presents itself, and away they go. Lucky are they if every flower they produce is not picked before a single seed can be set. This blackberry lily of gorgeous hue originally came from China. Escaping from gardens here and there, it was first reported as a wildflower at East Rock, Connecticut. Other groups of vagabonds were met marching along the roadsides on Long Island, near Suffern, New York, then farther southward and westward, until it has already attained a very respectable range. Every plant has some good device for sending its offspring away from home to found new colonies, if man would but let it alone. Better still, give the eager travelers a lift. Pointed blue-eyed grass, eyebright, blue star, Sisyrinchium angustifolium. Flowers from blue to purple with a yellow center. A western variety white. Usually several buds at the end of the stem between 2 erect unequal bracts. About 1/2 inch across. Perianth of 6 spreading divisions, each pointed with a bristle from a notch. Stamens 3, the filaments united to above the middle. Pistil 1, its tip 3-cleft. Stem 3 to 14 inches tall, pale hoary green, flat, rigid, 2-edged. Leaves grass-like, pale, rigid, mostly from base. Fruit 3-celled capsule, nearly globose. Preferred habitat: moist fields and meadows. Flowering season: May to August. Distribution: Newfoundland to British Columbia, from eastern slope of Rocky Mountains to Atlantic, south to Virginia and Kansas. Only for a day, and that must be a bright one, will this little sister of the stately blue flag open its eyes, to close them in indignation on being picked. Nor will any coaxing but the sunshine's induce it to open them again in water immediately after. The dainty flower, growing in dense tufts, makes up in numbers what it lacks in size and lasting power, flecking our meadows with purplish ultramarine blue on a sunny June morning. Later in the day, apparently there are no blossoms there, for all are tightly closed, never to bloom again. New buds will unfold to tinge the field on the morrow. Usually 3 buds nod from between a pair of bracts, but only one flower opens at a time. Slight variations in this plant have been considered sufficient to differentiate several species formerly included by Gray and other American botanists under the name of Sisyrinchium bermudiana. The orchis family, Orchidaceae. Large yellow lady slipper, whippoorwill shoe, yellow moccasin flower, Cypripedium pubescens, or Cypripedium hirsutum. Flower, solitary, large, showy, borne at the top of a leafy stem 1 to 2 feet high. Sepals 3, 2 of them united, greenish or yellow, striped with purple or dull red, very long and narrow. 2 petals, brown, narrower, twisting. The third an inflated sac open at the top, 1 to 2 inch long, pale yellow, purple lined. White hairs within, sterile stamen triangular, stigma thick. Leaves, oval or elliptic, pointed, 3 to 5 inches long, parallel nerved, sheathing. Preferred habitat, moist or boggy woods and thickets, hilly ground. Flowering season, May to July. Distribution, Nova Scotia to Alabama, westward to Minnesota and Nebraska. Swinging outward from a leaf-clasped stem, this orchid attracts us by its flaunted beauty and decorative form from tip to root. Not less than the aesthetic little bees, for which its adornment and mechanism are so marvelously adapted. Doubtless the heavy, oily odor is an additional attraction to them. These common orchids, which are not at all difficult to naturalize in a well-drained, shady spot in the garden, should be lifted with a good ball of earth and plenty of leaf mold immediately after flowering. The similar small yellow lady slipper, Cypripedium parviflorum, a delicately fragrant orchid about half the size of its big sister, has a brighter yellow pouch, and occasionally its sepals and petals are purplish. As they usually grow in the same localities and have the same blooming season, opportunities for comparison are not lacking. This fairer, sweeter little orchid roams westward as far as the state of Washington. Moccasin flower, pink, Venus or stemless lady slipper, Cypripedium acale. Flowers, fragrant, solitary, large, showy, drooping from end of scape 6 to 12 inches high. Sepals lance-shaped, spreading, greenish-purple, 2 inches long or less. Petals narrower and longer than sepals. Lip an inflated sac, often more than 2 inches long, slit down the middle and folded inwardly above. Pale magenta, veined with darker pink. upper part of interior crusted with long white hairs, stamens united with style into unsymmetrical declined column, bearing an anther on either side, and a dilated triangular petal-like sterile stamen above, arching over the broad concave stigma. Leaves, 2 from the base, elliptical, thick, 6 to 8 inches long. Preferred habitat, deep, rocky or sandy woods. Flowering season, May to June. Distribution, Canada southward to North Carolina, westward to Minnesota and Kentucky. Because most people cannot forbear picking this exquisite flower that seems too beautiful to be found outside a millionaire's hothouse, it is becoming rarer every year until the finding of one in the deep forest where it now must hide has become the event of a day's walk. Once it was the commonest of the orchids. Cross-fertilization, says Darwin, results in offspring which vanquish the offspring of self-fertilization in the struggle for existence. This has been the motto of the orchid family for ages. No group of plants has taken more elaborate precautions against self-pollination, or developed more elaborate and ingenious mechanism to compel insects to transfer their pollen than this. The fissure down the front of the pink lady slipper is not so wide but that a bee must use some force to push against its elastic sloping sides and enter the large banquet chamber where he finds generous entertainment secreted among the fine white hairs in the upper part. Presently he has feasted enough. Now one can hear him buzzing about inside, trying to find a way out of the trap, toward the 2 little gleams of light through apertures at the end of a passage beyond the nectary hairs. He at length finds his way. Narrower and narrower grows the passage until it would seem as if he could never struggle through. Nor can he until his back has rubbed along the sticky, overhanging stigma, which is furnished with minute, rigid, sharply pointed papillae, all directed forward, and placed there for the express purpose of combing out the pollen he has brought from another flower on his back or head. The imported pollen having been safely removed, he still has to struggle on toward freedom through one of the narrow openings, where an anther almost blocks his way. As he works outward, this anther, drawn downward on its hinge, plasters his back with yellow granular pollen as a parting gift, and away he flies to another lady slipper to have it combed out by the sticky stigma as described above. The smallest bees can squeeze through the passage without paying toll. To those of the Andrena and Halictus tribe, the flower is evidently best adapted. Sometimes the largest bumblebees, either unable or unwilling to get out by the legitimate route, bite their way to liberty. Mutilated sacs are not uncommon, but when unable to get out by fair means and too bewildered to escape by foul, the large bee must sometimes perish miserably in his gorgeous prison. Showy, gay, or spring orchis, Orchis spectabilis. Flowers, purplish pink, of deeper and lighter shade, the lower lip white and thick of texture, from 3 to 6 on a spike, fragrant, sepals pointed, united, arching above the converging petals and resembling a hood, lip large, spreading, prolonged into a spur, which is largest at the tip and as long as the twisted foot stem. Stem 4 to 12 inches high, thick, fleshy, 5-sided. Leaves 2 large, broadly ovate, glossy green, silvery on underside, rising from a few scales from root. Fruit, a sharply angled capsule 1 inch long. Preferred habitat, rich moist woods, especially under hemlocks. Flowering season, April to June. Distribution, from New Brunswick and Ontario southward to our southern states, westward to Nebraska. Of the 6 floral leaves which every orchid, terrestrial or aerial, possesses, one is always peculiar in form, pouch-shaped, or a cornucopia filled with nectar, or a flaunted fringed banner, or a broad platform for the insect visitors to alight on. Some orchids look to imaginative eyes as if they were masquerading in the disguise of bees, moths, frogs, birds, butterflies. A number of these queer freaks are to be found in Europe. Spring traps, adhesive plasters, and hair triggers attached to explosive shells of pollen are among the many devices by which orchids compel insects to cross-fertilize them. These flowers as a family, showing the most marvelous mechanism adapted to their requirements from insects in the whole floral kingdom. No other blossoms can so well afford to wear magenta, the ugliest shade nature produces, the lovely rosy purple of Dutch bulb growers. White fringed orchis, Habenaria blephariglottis. Flowers, pure white, fragrant, borne on a spike from 3 to 6 inches long, oval sepals, smaller petal-toothed, the oblong lip deeply fringed. Stem, slender, 1 to 2 feet high. Leaves, lance-shaped, parallel veined, clasping the stem, upper ones smallest. Preferred habitat, peat bogs and swamps. Flowering season, July to August. Distribution, northeastern United States and eastern Canada to Newfoundland. One who selfishly imagines that all the floral beauty of the earth was created for man's sole delight will wonder why a flower so exquisitely beautiful as this dainty little orchid should be hidden in inaccessible peat bogs, where overshoes and tempers get lost with deplorable frequency, and the water snake and bittern mock at man's intrusion of their realm by the ease with which they move away from him. Not for man, but for the bee, the moth, and the butterfly are orchids where they are and what they are. And with that very true observation, I think we'll end this evening's reading from Wildflowers Worth Knowing. After which, I must say, I do indeed know more about wildflowers, so that's nice. I hope you enjoyed it as well. If you'd like to read this work for yourself, as always, you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, the best place to catch me is on Twitter at BoringBooksPod, or drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.